Welcome everyone to another episode of Vinny Makes the Hall of Fame Case for ... And we've got a real special one today because both Vinny and myself, Kirk Buckner, owner of NotInHallOfFame.com, we have had the privilege, actually I've had the privilege, thanks to Vinny, of speaking with the son of this legend, George Kunz. And both of us have spoke with Matt Kunz. I had the pleasure of interviewing Matt for Not Hall of Fame as to why George should be in the Hall of Fame case, or should be in the Hall of Fame, pro football. So let's do it twice.
You might as well.
Yeah, might as well, as done by Vinny Lospinuso. How you doing, brother?
Doing fine myself. I'm, still pulling in there, still looking for other cases, and I know that the voters, from what Bengal Jim told me, the voters for the Hall of Fame voted for the modern era. Hopefully they say yes to the 30 seniors and the non-player too, because man, just get Buddy Parker in already.
Well, I think they will. As we're recording this, it is January the 18th, and the Football Hall of Fame committee would have already met, so they probably already know who they've decided for at this point for the modern list. But we are talking today about somebody who is on the senior list. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong here, Vin, was he not a semifinalist?
He was, well, when you say semifinalist, the Hall does it a little weird. Like they call both the list of 25 and the list of 12 as semifinalists.
Okay, so did he make both those lists?
The last 2 years, he's been in one of the top 25. He did not make it to the 12. I do know that back in 2021, if I'm not mistaken, even though this was never officially released, I do know he was in the top 12 for 2021. Not too sure about 2022 though, but he has been on their radar for a bit.
Okay, so we're talking about somebody who is on the radar, does have a legitimate shot, even though the senior road is a difficult one. It's not an impossible one. George is still alive. He's 78, living in Las Vegas, Nevada. And we're talking about a player who was dominant right from college all the way till near the end of his career. Taken number 2 overall in, was it 60? I'm blanking here, buddy. 68 draft?
It was, I think it was the 69 draft. Yeah, it was the 69 draft.
Okay.
He was taken right after OJ.
Okay. So had the fortune of playing for Notre Dame, the misfortune of being drafted for Atlanta at a time when Atlanta was, well, let's just be blunt, not very good.
You're saying unfortunate, but I don't think I would be talking about him if it wasn't for that connection.
Well, you know what I mean.
Yes, I'm very aware, and
yeah,
I will admit that even with his time with the Falcons, he was very dominant. You had Tommy Nobis dominant on the defensive side, and George Kunz dominant on the offensive side. You also need to understand for Atlanta, and Matt has told me this too. Another reason why it's been also kind of difficult for other Falcons is because Furman Bisher, there's a few reasons. First off, he was someone who was very big in the media over there, Bisher. He didn't have the best of relationship with the owner of the Falcons, Rankin Smith, and he was someone that kind of took it much more of an arm's length. So he was never someone that really advocated for any Falcons. So he never thought that any Falcon was deserving of the Hall of Fame. And that it's not really much of a coincidence that Claude Humphrey didn't make it until a year after he died.
But here we are. We still have a player that, even though he played for Atlanta, who he never saw a playoff as a Falcon.
No,
that never happened, which should not be sort of held against him. the NFL was a sort of was a completely different animal for people. Well, I'll say Vinny's age, but Vinny's an historian. Vinny knows his sports history. If I'm under 30 and I'm sort of coming up, I don't understand that an expansion team can't immediately contend in a few years. That was not the case for Atlanta when they came up. Uh,
No, when both the Falcons and the Saints came into the league, they
mhm,
also first started their first ever game was actually against the Rams with Roman Gabriel as the starting quarterback. Fun fact, you'll see a case for him down the road.
okay.
But they have a lot of connections with each other. Both were also really, really bad. People talk about how bad the Saints were, but the Falcons were also pretty awful for like a long stretch of time. They didn't make the playoffs until 1978. So more than a decade after their first ever season in the NFL. And it was difficult for many of the players there to really get much attention. They were seen as the heel of teams like the Rams or the Rams, who were a more dominant team of the era. So
Well, they
Atlanta,
were.
natural, yeah,
They were. That was a sad reality of how uh, there wasn't, a word that's used a lot in modern sports era is parity. That did not exist
no,
in those
that,
days at all. Building
that
a team from scratch, it, I think Vegas Golden Knight fans have no idea how lucky they are.
no, they're very lucky. Even the Seattle Kraken. You can go back even
Sure.
further with baseball. How the Marlins and the Diamondbacks won World Series very early in their histories. The Rockies went to the playoffs. They were actually the first ever National League wild card team. You have other instances of the Wild making the conference finals in the NHL a few years after they started. But you also have examples, even in the early 90s for the NHL, where the Sharks and the Senators, and even back further with the Capitals, where they were just abysmal, absolutely historically abysmal teams
Right.
right out the gate. The California Golden Seals, who are not even around anymore, were also pretty bad. And you look at the NFL times. When the Buccaneers came into the NFL, they started out their first 2 years 0-26 until they finally won the last two games of their second season. You have a lot of instances of teams that even the Cowboys, they were abysmal in their first ever year in the league. There's many examples of expansion teams being completely atrocious right out the gates. And this was the case for the Atlanta Falcons.
And
Granted, Kunz came
yeah,
in a few years later, but still,
no, they were terrible. And I
they were
think
awful.
I think that plays a factor overall. Uh, Kuntz, however, was recognized by his peers. At that time, they did the Pro Bowls themselves, the players, so they knew how good everyone was.
Yes.
So George Kunz as a Falcon, correct me if I'm wrong, four-time Pro Bowler. No, I think I got that right.
Yes and no. He was officially a Pro Bowler four times. 1970, he was injured that year, so he wasn't couldn't participate. But 1974, he probably should have another Pro Bowl.
So we're talking about somebody who, again, four Pro Bowls as a Falcon, recognized on a team that, my God, I mean, it was just such a different animal. But I think what also helps him when I had the chance to talk to Matt, and obviously you did too, we're talking about somebody who went in there guns a blazing, right? So like he comes from the highs of Notre Dame to the lows of Atlanta, and he says, "I'm a Falcon. That means that's what I'm here to do. I'm going to be the best Falcon I can be." I'm paraphrasing. He didn't quite say it like that, but that's kind of the attitude he went in there with. Uh,
Mhm.
was a locker room leader, was a union leader, was somebody who did a lot of stuff behind the scenes. Didn't get recognized for like the Alan Page Award or the Walter Payton Man of the Year. Granted, it wasn't called those then, but still, uh, somebody who was in contention for that. From what we
Yeah,
know,
he was
yes.
he was always one of the most dominant linemen in the NFC. In fact, Ron Yari, Matt had an interview with Ron Yari. He spoke with George, and he
Hmm.
said,
Yeah.
"I was a phenomenal lineman, and George, you were just as good as me." That's from
Right.
Ron Yari talking about George Kunz. And he
Yeah.
doesn't say that for just anyone. This is Ron Yari we're talking about, one of the greatest linemen of all time, part of those wonderful Vikings teams that even though they never won a Super Bowl, they were always a team that won their division each and every year.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I got that same interview too. So he gets traded to Indianapolis, or not Indianapolis. Sorry, God, Baltimore. My bad. And as Matt sort of told me, he likes to sort of joke that he went from a number 2 pick overall to a number 1 overall pick because that's who he got traded for.
Yes,
Yeah.
that is true. The
Illustrating his value.
Yes, he was traded to the Colts because there was a whole union stuff going on. Rankin Smith, who was the owner of the team,
Mhm.
wasn't so big on that, and therefore he was dealt. In fact, to this very day, Kunz is not in the Falcons Ring of Honor or the Georgia Sports Hall of Fame.
Or the College Football Hall of Fame,
That's correct, even though he was a consensus All-American in 1968.
which means he
And
qualifies because that's what you have to You need that to qualify to be in the College Football Hall of Fame. A lot of people
yes,
don't
and
necessarily
he was
know that.
also a member of the national championship team in 1966. Like he has a case for that as well. And
Absolutely.
I do hope that
But
with Rankin Smith no longer there, Arthur Blank needs to get him in the Ring of Honor at the very least. Um, I know. Before I
yeah,
get into the Baltimore, I mentioned the Atlanta part first, um, because I know that Matt has told me he's been speaking very close with people at the Georgia Hall of Fame, and they're trying to do whatever they possibly can to put him into the 2025 class.
well, that'd be great.
And yeah, like I think I might be able, I think I might go to that. I'm not sure, but
Mhm.
we also got to see what happens. We can't just throw the baby out with the bathwater. We got to see what happens there. But
Yeah,
you are correct. He was dealt to the Colts for the number 1 overall pick, and the Falcons used that to take their first ever franchise quarterback, Steve Bartkowski, Peachtree Bart as they called him, who was from UCLA,
mhm.
and he was their best quarterback for a while.
And with the Colts, I mean, as much as we think of him as a Falcon, he's that Pro Bowl number 5 came as a Colt. The
Hmm.
Colts got a lot better once he got there too.
Oh
Made
yeah.
the playoffs, so it's like he was part of a missing piece of that puzzle to get them over. So when we look at offensive linemen, it's don't think of Jason Kelsey, guys. Jason Kelsey has been propelled into the national spotlight. Offensive linemen are not. Offensive linemen are lucky whenever they get any kind of notice at all. And
Yeah.
if you're not sort of in the public eye, it's so easily to sort of like fall down the ladder.
And I love Jason Kelsey. He's a phenomenal
I'm
center,
not
but
dumping on Kelsey, but I
yeah,
more meant that Kelsey was an exception to the rule.
yes, like Kelsey, because he was an Eagle, because he was granted, not saying that being an Eagle helps him, it kind of does, but look at Al Lister, it hasn't helped him as that
Well, it
much.
helps him being Travis's brother and being a potential brother-in-law to Taylor Swift.
That also helps, but also even like earlier on, he was pretty vocal. George was never someone like that. He was someone that even when he was an all pro in 75, 76, 77, he was the Seagram Seven Crowns Offensive Lineman of the
Yeah.
Year for both 76 and 77, and the
He's a
NFLPA
lawyer.
Lineman
It's
of the
not like he can't talk.
Yeah, like again, he's been named the Lineman of the Year,
Yeah.
like
Yeah, yeah,
not
yeah.
not just like regardless. So you could see his dominance right there. I know
Absolutely.
he was also top 10 in terms of approximate value in 1976. So PFR says that is his best ever season. You also look at linemen that have like when you look at offensive tackles that have 7 or more Pro Bowls, you look at the names right here, like you look at the names for 7 Pro Bowls. Like he is the only
Sure.
one that's. I mean, unless you're going to throw in Tyre, which I don't see ever happening. He's in the mutt with he's in the moat of with 7 Pro Bowls in terms of modern. That's 1955 and onward, with fellow senior and also former fellow Colt and Falcon Chris Hinton. But from what I understand, Kunz is a bit more leg up, considering Kunz has been there a bit longer. He's older. Doesn't mean Hinton doesn't have a case or have a chance. He was also
Was Hinton not in that first round too?
Hinton was
In
no
that
Hinton was
last one?
taken. Hinton was taken in the 80s. Like he's the guy
No,
that's
no, no, no. In the senior pool.
yes, he was one of the 25
That's
also.
what. Yeah, that's where I'm going with that. Sorry, I wasn't clear.
Yeah,
My bad.
Kunz is also there's also you look at PFR's all decade team in the 1970s. Look at there's 4 tackles, 2 first team, 2 second team. Art Shell and Ron Urey in the first team, Rayfield Wright and George Kunz in the second team. Kunz is the only one of those that's not in. Also, if you look at, if you go further to like guard, you can see like Kuchenberg, and then you also have Lenhouse and Jack Rudney. So you have George Kunz as the only offensive tackle on the PFR's all decade list that's not in Canton just yet.
Well, let's hope that word is yet.
Just yet. I do emphasize just yet.
There you go. All right. So there's a lot of other shows here in the Bucknerverse. Check those out. Other shows that Vinny has done promoting some other cases. Look always for the weekly Hall of Fame show with Evan Nolan. Look at some other special interviews that I've done. So much here in the Kirk Buckner world. Wherever you are, wherever you may be, stay safe, everybody.